It's go time.
Welcome to the Third Down Gamble podcast with your hosts Don Charbin and Heath Graham. Saskatchewan Roughriders head coach Corey Mace discusses the team after a loss.
Attention to detail and just all the things that we talk about nonstop. I just felt we fell short in many of those categories last week. More attention to detail of who we are. For us, if we do get ourselves in opportunities, we're trying to run the ball, establish ourselves across the LOS and make sure we're falling forward. And then defensively, we got to have some gap integrity, be accountable for who we got to be and tackle by population. You're always going to look inward of how we can be better. In the same breath, we can't control what they do. We can only control what we can do, and we missed the mark.
Welcome, everyone. Heath has joined me again for another podcast episode. Seems like, I'm sorry to say, but the Ottawa RedBlacks are top of mind and top of headline when it comes to the Canadian Football League and our podcast. Last week, we talked a lot about them, and here we are back at it with more changes. Heath, what do you want to talk about?
Well, top of the news chain and bottom of the standings is where the Ottawa RedBlacks sit right now dropping to 0-10 with their most recent loss to the Montreal Alouettes. Over the course of the last couple of days, they've announced that Shemar Bridges is out as president of the Ottawa RedBlacks, and just announced a few hours ago today, a familiar name in CFL circles, Jim Popp has been hired as a senior football advisor for the remainder of the 2026 season.
Yeah, and Jim Popp, of course, started his career with the Saskatchewan Roughriders back in 1992. Most famously, though, he and Mark Trestman engineered that Montreal Alouette team that was so dominant for a dozen years in the East and won 3 Grey Cups over its tour. Your thoughts on his hiring? Do you think, now this is an interim type thing and it's an advisory role. Your thoughts on that?
It was interesting to see his name pop up, no pun intended. Again, it's somebody that I haven't really thought of in CFL circles for the last couple of seasons for sure. As we talked about last week, with the change in leadership with the Ottawa RedBlacks, I thought there was going to be some familiar names coming about and somebody that's been around the league, has those kinds of connections. And now, yes, it's an advisory role at this point only, but Jim Popp is certainly somebody that has put in time with the CFL, about 20 years plus experience. Actually, I guess doing the math, closer to 30 years experience in CFL circles. That's a lot of connections he's made and a lot of knowledge of the Canadian Football League.
Yes, and it's been a while since he has had his hand with any team. Montreal, as I indicated earlier, the most famous, and they did very well. I did find that near the end of his tenure with the Alouettes that he started to get too involved in basically being GM and then head coach. I think he was just trusting himself more than he was trusting other people around him. I don't think that's going to be a case in Ottawa, where he's just taking over as this advisory role. The departed Sean Burke, who was the vice president of football operations, a 21-60-1 record. Now, he was highly touted coming out of Hamilton. He was well liked and is still well liked by Ottawa, the organization. I was surprised, to be quite honest, that we're just on the verge of Labor Day weekend. We're about a week away, and you make another significant change. The first and foremost, we're not a week away from Adrian Sierra being moved out of his role as president, pushed over to the hockey operation, which it wasn't necessarily a dismissal. It was more just trying to get somebody single focused on football rather than have somebody worry about the junior hockey team in the Ontario Hockey League and the Canadian Football League team and the Ottawa RedBlacks. Divided up, make sure that we've got one person only. Now, Mark Goody, of course, is behind a lot of this. And I'm sure that there's some frustration with him, as well as he has some frustration, obviously, with the fact that the team is 0-10, that they're 0-16. The Hamilton Flying Wildcats record of 16 straight losses is staring them in the face next up. You don't want these types of dubious distinctions especially now in basically a very economically tight universe of professional sport where a losing season can really hamper you. Now, granted, OSAG, Ottawa Sports Entertainment Group, has deep pockets. They can't sit idly by while all of this happens either.
Just to confirm, the losing streak is now currently at 16 games, 10 this season and 6 at the tail end of the 2025 season. It's always interesting to see people put into these advisory roles. And we've seen it with Wally Buono being hired as a consultant advisor for Edmonton. And we've seen the fruits of those labors in how they've built the new leadership from the president on down with the Edmonton Elks football team.
I'll push back on that because Wally Buono was behind the hiring of Chris Jones.
Fair enough.
Let that speak for itself.
Yeah. Chris Jones is also a Grey Cup winning head coach. There's some pros and cons there, and he was hoping to catch fire in a bottle again, if you will, and repeat the success they previously had with Chris Jones at the helm.
Well, they did for sure, but what they wanted from Chris Jones was that commitment that he wasn't going to bolt mid-contract and go somewhere else like he had the previous time and jumped over to the Saskatchewan Roughriders. I don't think, though, that they countenanced how much turnover in the roster that they would go through while he was there. And that was something that you should have known when he was with the Saskatchewan Roughriders, when he had both roles, GM and coach. Edmonton learned their lesson and went out and hired Chris Morris. Then he moved over to get Ed Hervey, and Ed Hervey then brought in Mark Killam. And stability is what you need, and quality people in each position. They've found that, I think.
I'd be very surprised to see if Jim Popp is involved in bringing Chris Jones to the Ottawa RedBlacks organization. Stranger things have happened. You never know, but I would expect to see some movement, and certainly Popp will have the ability to ask the right questions when they're bringing in people in these new upper management roles. Ryan Dinwiddie, of course, retains currently the position of general manager, head coach, and offensive coordinator for the Ottawa RedBlacks. He's got a lot on his plate right now. And when you start to eliminate those positions above him, somebody has to step in and fill the void. And for the foreseeable future, it's Jim Popp right now. And I would expect them to be getting their hands really into finding the next president of the club.
I don't argue that. In fact, I think you're exactly right when you say that for Ryan Dinwiddie, the expectations just go higher. And of course, the workload goes higher. Where do you find all the extra time? This is what you and I have been bantering about forever, when it was Wally Buono being GM and coach of the BC Lions, when we had Chris Jones, of course, dual role with the Saskatchewan Roughriders, and then he had it with Edmonton. Now, Ryan Dinwiddie, is it a good thing? Can they manage both positions? Absolutely. But you're kind of diametrically opposed in some senses, because on one hand, you're out there coaching, working with these people every day. And then on the other hand, you're having to look at salary caps and performance values, and you've got both roles. You're praising them for being great on the field, and then maybe you have to cut them because the salary cap just doesn't afford them.
Exactly. You're trying to coach them up on the field, but also looking at their possible replacement in that general manager role as well. And who are you bringing into the practice roster? Who are you bringing into training camps for competition? All those sorts of factors. And I strongly believe that it's too much to ask of one person to be in that head coach GM role successfully. Now, we've seen some success, and Dave Dickinson in Calgary is an example of that right now as well. He hasn't really won a Grey Cup in this role right now. And if you look at the West standings, which team is at the bottom currently, it's the Calgary Stampeders. I do believe they're a competitive team, and I would not be surprised to see them get into the playoff picture here before the end of the season. But again, it just shows how much involvement there is and how many distractions to have somebody in those two dual roles.
I totally agree, because if you're Dave Dickinson, if you're Ryan Dinwiddie, you go to practice, you're on the field 90 minutes with the players, then you've got film study, and you've got meetings with your offensive and defensive coordinators, and you've got meetings with other coaches about other things. Then there's more film study. Where do you find time to go recruit? Or how do you talk to your scouts and all of that? I don't see how these things are totally simpatico, if you want to use an ancient term from web services. The whole idea is to have, I think, distinctive powers for distinctive people. Have your coach be the coach, have your GM be the GM, have your president be the president, and each one answers to the other. Players answers to the coach, coach answers to the GM, etc. When you muddle with that, when you put so much in one person, and what if it doesn't work out with Dinwiddie? What kind of vacuum does that create? And remember, too, that despite going 21-60-1, the Red Blacks are still going to be paying for Burke for another year and a half on his contract. And they can amortize that over 5 years, but that still counts against their operations cap.
It does. And this is the topic, and some of the issues around that operations cap is the Ottawa RedBlacks are in a situation, as you say, where they're paying him out over the next year and a half. That affects your bottom line and how much you can spend on the replacements.
Well, the thing is, though, remember that, as I said, they can amortize that over 5 years. So let's say he's owed, for sake of argument, $1 million, just for sake of argument. They can put 200,000 of that against the cap for the next 5 years. So it's less damaging in that sense, but they've already got two other people chewing up cap space. And that's, of course, your former defensive coordinator. And how does Sayara's money impact that too? Granted, it wasn't a firing, but it was a shuffle.
Because of his role with OSEG, I'm not quite sure exactly how much his salary impacts the Red Blacks on this operations cap. It has to factor into some degree, but he's also more involved in the upper level of OSEG and the Ottawa 67s as well. So we're not sure how the math really breaks down in that regard, but you're absolutely right. And they've gone through the coaching change, of course, with Bob Dice being replaced last year.
Is Bob Dice still on the salary of the Ottawa RedBlacks for another so many months? You keep piling it on. This is the problem that the Ottawa RedBlacks have. You're allowed a mulligan as soon as you get to that second one, and now a third. You're going to have to answer for that. And it does hamstring your ability to climb out of it.
Bob Dice was signed through the 2026 season when he signed his extension with the Red Blacks as well. So that's one more piece of the puzzle that is on the books for this season. Again, how you can break down and split up those salaries over the next 5 years comes into play, but they are a little bit at a disadvantage right now, given how many former staff they're paying.
Exactly. And the cap is still, I think, around 2.8 million. You've got how many people that you want to hire within that cap. You're limiting yourself. It's one of the answers, and we saw the Edmonton Elks go through this. Well, let's just put a whole bunch of positions into one person: defensive coordinator, head coach, and general manager in Chris Jones. If it doesn't work out with Chris Jones, you got that void of all three positions going out the door at once. Plus, you're probably paying some extra for him to do all three. Well, that salary came off against the Elks until I think it was Game 5 of last year. It's really tricky. And it's one of those things that, and when you're in a spiral, how do you climb yourself out of it? What do you do to make the change? How do you approach that change? And do you have the wherewithal to make the change? In other words, do you have enough resources to do it?
The Red Blacks currently sit 5 wins out of a playoff spot with 8 games remaining in their season. I don't know how urgent it is to fill these roles right now. Getting Jim Popp into the position to start working through that process is the huge first step. We may not see an announcement before the end of this 2026 season. They might be eyeing up some guys that are involved with other organizations in roles that they can't pry them away until the end of the season.
And for that, maybe the Red Blacks are thankful that this season is all but a write-off. Winning out would give them a chance at making the playoffs, but the question becomes, what's going to change that allows you to lose 10 straight and suddenly now you found that golden nugget that's going to carry you to 8 straight wins? I don't think even the Red Blacks see it, but they want some credibility. And that's where a win somewhere would matter most. And whether that involves Jim Popp maybe finding a player or two. What does Jim Popp do for instance, when he sits down to talk to Ryan Dinwiddie about their quarterbacking situation? Does he have enough sway, or does he have any sway to say, hey, I like what you're doing, or I don't?
That's a great question. And if Ryan Dinwiddie is truly the general manager of this club, Jim Popp shouldn't really have much say in the starting quarterback. And you think of Jerry Jones with the Dallas Cowboys and how hands-on he is, and sometimes how that handcuffs general managers and head coaches of the Cowboys and limits their success because he's too hands-on.
Well, they don't have a general manager anymore. It's Jerry Jones.
Exactly. So if you truly want to allow Ryan Dinwiddie to put his stamp on this team, you have to allow him to make those player personnel decisions. Now, if I'm Jim Popp stepping into this role, I might pull him aside and look at this 0-10 record and really dig deep into Jake Maier's quarterback stats this season and ask the question if he's the guy. If not, who is, and how quickly can you get somebody else in and up to speed? That's another challenge that they're facing right now. McLeod Bethel-Thompson and Jake Maier are the two quarterbacks really of note on the roster. Neither one of them has been performing at a high level, but it's pretty deep into the season to start fresh.
Oh, you're exactly right. This season, as I said, if they can sneak a 1, maybe 2 wins out of it, just avoid the goose egg. That's going to be so huge to their psyche. And you're essentially right now, as much as it pains anybody to hear this, you're building for 2027. You're starting to put together the team that's going to take the field next May when the season starts. You have to think of it that way, because what is it that you can also do in this season that's going to matter? Other than maybe getting a win and a win at home, which would be sweet for the home faithful. The Ottawa faithful still believes in this team. They're going to have to ride it out, and they're going to have to wait and see what happens. I don't think that they're going to turn away. Obviously, attendance will slip somewhat. What else do you do? It's just so far gone in terms of the record. I'm not saying the team itself. I'm just talking about the record.
I agree with you. I think they're in auditioning for next season mode at this point. So the players have to start thinking of their future. One, do they want a future with this team or just in the league in general? And there's often that argument of how well a player plays when they're in a contract negotiations season. That has to start to be front of mind for these Ottawa RedBlacks players. And it might sound a little bit selfish, but they, at this point, need to start looking out for themselves and securing their future.
That's a great point, too. And this is really this tug that's going to go on between the two sides. You're a free agent, let's say, coming up, and I'll use CJ Rivas. He signed a 1-year deal with the Ottawa RedBlacks. He looks at a team that basically went nowhere. Does he want to stay? Does he want to be a part of something new that may happen in 2027? Or does he say, no, I don't know if I think this team is going to happen, and I want to get to somewhere where I can win again? Those types of discussions are going on all the time in locker rooms and even among teams. They're checking it out. What's it like to play for this coach? What's it like to play in this stadium? It's not like it's people that are going to jump ship per se, but you got to wonder, there's going to be change because the RedBlacks can't go and become better with what they've got. There still has to be something else that's out there that can help them. For the people that are fearful of being let go, do you start talking to your agent and say, hey, who's out there needing a defensive back? Who out there needs a running back?
I think those questions are starting to circulate amongst the players and the agents, as you said. And you talked about the Ottawa RedBlacks faithful. This has been a tough stretch for RedBlacks fans. Their attendance is down almost 14% below where they were in 2025 at just over 15,000 a game. That's still a solid core group of people that are coming to support a team that hasn't been rewarding them with success on the field. I urge RedBlacks fans to stay patient, keep going, show the team that you love them no matter what, but it's not necessarily a time where you are silent about that on-field product. Voice your displeasure with what you're seeing. Please continue to support the team and the league.
It's the hardest thing, I think, for any franchise. We saw this in Edmonton where attendance fell off, and it had a lot to do with performance on the field, but it also had to do with management and how people felt that they were being treated by the organization. Now that the team has got itself sorted out and on the field, the Elks are winning, you've seen attendance just jump hugely in Edmonton. Saskatchewan was the same way. It kind of dipped for a little while. Then they got some players here that connected with the community. All of a sudden, the team started to play better. Winnipeg, what was attendance like before they started to go to Grey Cups? They weren't selling out every week. But when you get quality people and when you get results on the field, it makes for a better situation for everybody. Not everybody can win, but you want that indication from any season going into it that you have a decent chance.
Edmonton's a great example, and attendance-wise, with the team being in first place in the West, we're seeing that attendance creep up. They are 14.3% above where they were last year, averaging over 21,000 fans per game. That's getting into that top half of the league for average attendance. And as they continue to pull out those wins, especially those home wins, the fans are coming back.
Hey, it's Dave Thomas, voice of your Saskatchewan Roughriders, and you're listening to the Third Down Gamble Podcast.
Moving over to a team that had been the cat's meow of the West Division, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, and I'll toss into this the Saskatchewan Roughriders. Both of those teams lost on the weekend last. Winnipeg blowing a huge lead against Edmonton, and the Elks coming all the way back and winning on a last play field goal. Do any of those teams or both of those teams have to be concerned right now heading towards Labor Day?
They do. And I had my preseason predictions, the Bombers finishing at 9-9. Right now they're at 5-5. So they're on pace to be the team that I expected to see on the field. They do have a tough schedule in the second half. So they need to pull out some upset wins to even maintain that 500 record and have any chance at the playoffs. I think Saskatchewan is in a better position right now. They start to get some guys back from injury, maybe build a little bit of momentum there. But Trevor Harris has had a tough last couple of games on the field as well. And with the Bombers, Tommy Condell and Brady Oliveira seem to be at odds as to what this offense should look like.
Trevor Harris did not look good in BC, and he certainly did not put up any numbers to write home about in Hamilton. Both losses. The Rough Riders giving up 4 turnovers against the BC Lions. And the other thing that everybody talks about was shooting themselves in the foot, where the Rough Riders gave up 2 touchdowns because of penalties. One being illegal hands to the face, the other being a no yards penalty. 14 points off the board. Also a fumble deep in BC territory. Could have been a field goal or 7. You can't do that. You can't go around and make mistakes and cost yourself and expect to win.
You can't. And especially this loss against the BC Lions. The Lions have now rolled off 4 straight wins after the tough start to the season and Nathan Rourke's injury. The Lions are starting to look like that team that we predicted to be at the top of the West standings at the beginning of the season. They're getting hot at the right time here. And the Elks, even though they have a bit of a comfortable lead in the West right now, have to be looking over their shoulder and watching those Lions closing in on them.
The BC Lions look like the BC Lions that we saw at the end of 2025, where they were making the push. If Nathan Rourke stays healthy, watch out. They've got everything they need. They've got a 2-headed monster in the backfield. They've got great receiving. Javon Katoy, having him back in the lineup. In fact, you look at the BC Lions, they had 5 starting receivers out of the lineup at one time in this stretch of losses prior to them turning it around. That's ridiculous. And they also had their starting quarterback out. Now that all of those pieces have come back together, we're starting to see what the BC Lions are. If I'm the Edmonton Elks, that's the number 1 team I think I need to be worried about, is that BC Lion team. Not the fact that they've won 4 in a row. It's how they've been doing it.
The Elks are still sitting in a pretty good situation. They've won the season series against the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. They've split the first 2 games with Saskatchewan. They do have one more matchup between those two. But with the Lions trending the way they are, that's the team I would be most afraid of in the West right now. And we see some key matchups coming down the stretch here where a lot of these teams are going to be facing each other. Winnipeg, BC play again as well. Winnipeg, Edmonton play against each other. Of course, we've got the Labor Day back-to-backs coming up between Winnipeg and Saskatchewan. A team's got to get really hot to track down the Edmonton Elks. And I feel that it's almost to the point where it's Calgary, Saskatchewan, Winnipeg fighting for third place and possibly fourth place in that crossover. I firmly believe that the Elks and Lions are going to be hosting playoff games in the West.
I don't argue that at all. The way that, again, it's the way they've come back. I was picking on Mike Benavides prior when everything was sort of going off the rails. He's found something. Getting Parker McKenna into the lineup. I had that podcast episode with Steve Daniel, and we talked quickly about that. We always seem to look at what the quarterback does for a offense, but sometimes there's a guy that comes off the practice roster, as Parker McKenna has for the BC Lions, and changes everything. The other thing too is that Darnell Sankey took a little while to get used to the schemes that were being run in BC, and now that he has, my goodness, he was beating up Saskatchewan Roughriders in that game.
He was. It's the cohesiveness, and I think we can't discount the effect of having Nathan Rourke miss several games due to injury. Now that those other pieces were getting comfortable in their roles, you bring the reigning MOP back onto the roster and look out. Javon Katoy is a great one that you mentioned earlier. He had one of his best games of his CFL career in this last game against the Saskatchewan Roughriders. He made some key catches. He was hard to bring down, gained huge chunks of yardage when called upon. Xander Horvath, again, that short yardage specialist and the hard-nosed running back that just comes right at you game after game. You got Nathan Rourke throwing to dangerous receivers. Then you got somebody like Horvath coming out of the backfield. That's a tough team to stop right now.
You're right. Javon Katoy, 6 receptions for 110 yards and a touchdown. It seems as though that if the BC Lions need some tough yards, Katoy is the guy that they're going to find open. He doesn't give up on anything. How many times did Jackson Ford have a shot at him and not bring him down? Everyone's picking on Jackson Ford for the type of game he had. Jackson Ford was just a half a second off. He did make an interception, but he missed another. He took that really cheap roughing penalty that set the BC Lions up at the 1. That's frustration. It's a game that probably in the long run he'll want to forget, but you got to learn from these situations. For the Rough Riders, I mean, okay, you could look at the stats and you could say that Trevor Harris put up some decent numbers. He threw for 356 yards, but he threw 2 picks again. And at one moment in that game, one of the camera operators for TSN caught Harris pulling his helmet off and screaming into his helmet. I don't think he was screaming into the mic. I think he was screaming frustration into that helmet. It's not a great look.
It's not. And you talk about Jackson Ford. He's giving up 6 inches and 25 pounds to Javon Katoy. When you get a receiver or an offensive player with the ball that's that big and strong out in the open, he's a tough guy to bring down, especially when you're giving up that much of a weight advantage.
And for the Saskatchewan Roughriders too, listening to Corey Mace talk about what this team is doing right now, it's got to be frustrating for him. You can hear it in his voice. This is the time when your coaching mettle is really tested. It's great to be a coach when everything is working absolutely the way you want it to, that the assignments are being executed well, that the team is putting up the points when they need to. The last 2 weeks, this team hasn't put up a lot of points.
We talk about both Winnipeg and Saskatchewan right now. They've got some tough home games this week. Winnipeg hosts Montreal. Saskatchewan hosts the Argonauts. And then they meet in those back-to-back weeks. This is crunch time for these two teams. And where they finish in the standings, a lot of those questions are going to be answered over these next 3 games.
It's an interesting phraseology when you say they've got some tough games ahead of them, because you only say that if you're the team that needs the wins. Montreal is on record pace in terms of their franchise. If they keep this up, this will be the best start in franchise history. Davis Alexander has been lights out. He's a wonder to watch, and this league is just so lucky to have him. In fact, we've got so many great quarterbacks in this league. For the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, what happened? In that first half, Brady Oliveira is running for about 100 yards. Zach Collaros looks like he can do no wrong. In this third quarter, the Blue Bombers actually lose 5 net yards of their total offense. They had 300 at halftime. They were down to 295 at the end of the third quarter.
This is what I mentioned earlier about offensive coordinator Tommy Condell and running back Brady Oliveira not being on the same page. Brady had over 100 yards rushing in the first half. He had 2 touches total in the entirety of the second half. This was a game that was not out of hand. As you mentioned earlier, Edmonton won it on a last-second field goal. It wasn't the time to go away from the success of your running game. I don't feel like there was enough of a drop-off on those 2 touches that Oliveira had in the second half to think, well, we're not going to let this guy touch the ball for the next 30 minutes. It didn't make a lot of sense. And I don't know if it's Tommy Condell trying to impose his will on Brady Oliveira and reestablish that he is in charge of this offense, or what the disconnect is. But it's concerning for Bomber fans right now, and it's got to be concerning for the players and the coaching staff. They need to figure out what's going on quickly to get themselves locked into this playoff race.
To be fair to Condell, though, the 2 plays that Oliveira had in the second half, one was a 2-yard rush, and the other one he was stuffed behind the line of scrimmage. Now, you could argue that's small sample size given what happened in the first half. You should have gone back to it more often and see what it would have provided you. And it wasn't like the Blue Bombers were chasing anything. They were ahead at that moment. So they were looking to kill the clock. And yet he went into shotgun with Zach Collaros, and they were throwing incessantly. Brady Oliveira didn't catch anything out of the backfield. They just had a different philosophy. Now, let's give some credit to the Elks, too, because at halftime, they obviously saw something that they figured that they could capitalize on. And one of those things, obviously, was shutting down Oliveira. The other thing, too, Winnipeg couldn't make a deep shot if their life depended upon it.
They couldn't. And we have to really give props to the Edmonton Elks team as well. Even though Winnipeg seemed to dominate the first half offensively, Edmonton's defense kept them out of the end zone on multiple occasions, resulted in field goal after field goal. There's also a turnover on downs in there. Edmonton kept this game close. They scored a touchdown late in the first half to get within 10 points, and they chipped away and turned the tide in the second half. Halftime adjustments are huge in professional football. Edmonton certainly had the advantage in the changes that they made at the half.
Now, do you worry about Zach Collaros, especially against the Elks? He threw for 219 yards. Against Ottawa the week before, it was 222. These are not typical Zach Collaros numbers, unless Brady Oliveira is going for 200 on the ground. Do you worry? And especially the way the Elks beat him up. It wasn't vicious. It wasn't hellacious, but Collaros would be getting off the field like he didn't want to be there anymore.
It is concerning, and we talked a lot last week about the hit that he took that knocked him out of the game for a few plays. He's bounced back. I'm not convinced he's 100% after coming back from the whiplash injury that knocked him out of a couple of games as well. He still gives the Bombers the best chance to win, looking at their quarterback depth. I know some people will argue with this, but he doesn't have the ability to throw the deep ball as consistently as he used to. That's taking a weapon away as well. The Bombers have a lot of pieces on offense that can be successful if they're firing. There's some concerns with the offensive line. That's what leads to the pressure and the knockdowns on Zach Collaros that build up over time. And if he's not feeling 100%, those can be big factors to take his focus away and prevent him from being the elite quarterback that he has been in the past.
It's the sort of philosophy that some defensive coaches call it. It's not diminish the capacity, it's diminish the will. Let him know every time that you're around. Let him know that he has to be thinking about you, and let him know that if he's going to stand in the pocket too long, he's going to know that he shouldn't have done that. Collaros took a lot of hits against the Elks. The one thing that I thought was very poignant in this football game, TSN cameras, again, give them credit, they got it. He throws that touchdown where Tim White busts through the middle, goes deep. There's a mix-up in the defensive secondary for Edmonton, and he's wide open in the end zone, and Collaros finds him for the score. As he's running down the field, Mike O'Shea, which I don't think I've ever seen him do this, runs out in the field and shake Collaros' hand with a big smile on his face. I'm no lip reader, but it's like an attaboy. And I'm just wondering, why would he have to do that with Zach Collaros, a guy who's been through everything? What is the subplot to this? Is there something more to his health that O'Shea is saying, see, I knew you could do it?
That's a great question. And I believe there is. Like I said, I don't think he's fully 100% coming back off the injury. The Bombers can still be a playoff team. And as we've seen in the past, you get into the playoffs, anything can happen. The odds are stacked against you, but it's not unheard of for a third place team to go on a run and win the Grey Cup. In fact, Winnipeg did that exact thing in 2019, but they have to get ready to go into this stretch run and hopefully into the playoffs healthy.
The 2019 Winnipeg Blue Bombers was a different animal, though. Zach Collaros comes over there. He's rested and ready, and he has an amazing stretch run. Now, in the Grey Cup game itself, he didn't play so well, but he didn't have to because the defense was so dominant. And that team also had Adam Big Hill. They had a very young Willie, and they had his cohort on the other side, Jackson Jeffcoat. Winnipeg had everything going for them, and we could see why, because they're back in 21, they're back in 22, they're back in 23, and they're back in 24. That was the nucleus. They had it built in 2019, and they had the doink and the West Final to help them get over that hump to get to the Grey Cup. And they played a Hamilton Tiger Cat team where Dane Evans got scared. You can do a lot of things if you're a good defense.
Third down.
CFL Thursday Night Football has wrapped up for the season. We start the week off with Friday Night Football. The Montreal Alouettes, first place team in the East, head to Winnipeg to take on the 5-5 Winnipeg Blue Bombers. The Alouettes are a 6.5-point favorite on the road.
When was the last time that the road team was favored in Winnipeg?
It's a great question. And certainly if they were, it was maybe by 1.5 to 2.5, a 6.5-point spread for a road team.
Could have been Saskatchewan back in 2019 or something like that. It's been a long time since Winnipeg hasn't been favored at home. And given the way the Elks came back and took it to them in the second half of that game in Edmonton, where Winnipeg just disappeared. They had one drive in the fourth quarter where they tried to make a game of it. Montreal is running so well, and they've got such a good defense. I'd be scared if I'm Winnipeg. Is Stanley Bryant up to making all of the blocking assignments that he's required to do against this Alouettes team? Because Stanley's getting to be 40. And
it pains me to say this, but I'm taking the Montreal Alouettes minus the 6.5 in Winnipeg. I just see a dominant team, best team in the league, hands down at this point in this Montreal Alouettes team. They're getting very close to clinching a playoff spot and home field advantage throughout the Eastern playoffs as well. I think they keep rolling. I don't see Winnipeg stopping them. The problems and holes in that Winnipeg Blue Bombers secondary, when you've got Davis Alexander throwing the ball to Tyson Philpott, magical things can happen, and I would expect to see a big night from those two.
I think back to what Jalen Philpott did to the Winnipeg Blue Bombers when Calgary was in town. There was a lot of disinterest in the Winnipeg secondary to tackle. And if Tyson Philpott is ripping them, Cole Speaker or Tyler Sneed, or take your pick, like which poison do you want? Davis Alexander is going to roll out of that pocket and throw it 70 yards, and Winnipeg isn't going to do anything about it. They're better than what they were. I still like the Alouettes because A, they're the best team in the league, and B, Winnipeg, it's not their defense that scares me the most, even though the secondary I don't really trust. It's their offense. I just think they're getting old. Tim White is good, but even he's past 30. Look at Zach Collaros. How much more of a beating is he going to take before he finally just says, that's it, I can't do this anymore. I've got to get off this field. Montreal with the cover.
The first game of a Saturday doubleheader, the Hamilton Tiger Cats are in Calgary to take on the Stampeders. Calgary's coming off of a bye week. Hopefully that means Vernon Adams Jr. is healthy and recovered from getting dumped on his head in their previous game. The Stamps are a 6.5-point favorite at home. Do the Tiger Cats have enough to come in and pull off an upset?
I think if they start Harrison Frost, they might, but I don't know with Trey Ford. Trey Ford showed a lot of good things. When the crunch was on and they were in that 3rd and 5, he made a pretty much rookie mistake by throwing the ball towards the sideline and hoping for some miracle. Throwing it underneath at about 3 yards and then hoping your running back, who's completely covered, is going to get the extra 2 yards against 2 defenders. No, that to me was bailing on the play. I don't think that Harrison Frost does that as much. Now, I do like the style of play that Ford brings, but I think Harrison Frost is a better pure quarterback in the traditional style of getting back into the pocket, waiting for that read and go.
I might go the other way on this one and think that Trey Ford has a better chance to beat the Calgary Stampeders than Harrison Frost. And the reason for that is he has the escapability to get away from the pressure of that Calgary defensive line and the speed to outrun some of those defensive ends. I don't see them pulling off the upset. I am going to take the Calgary Stampeders minus the 6.5 points. I just think that stylistically, Trey Ford might be the better matchup.
Teams coming off the bye, what do we know? They win about 8 out of every 10, maybe 9 out of every 10. Calgary's coming off the bye. Yes, Vernon Adams Jr. did get an injury in his last game against the BC Lions. All word is that he's going to be the starting quarterback in this football game. If that's the case, and he's right, I don't see a path forward for the Hamilton Tiger Cats. Their defense is coming around. They're better. Hamilton rarely wins in Calgary. Calgary in the cover.
Game 2 of the Saturday doubleheader, the Toronto Argonauts head west to the Saskatchewan Roughriders. The Riders are a 4.5 point favorite at home against Chad Kelly and the Argos. Are the Roughriders healthy enough to cover this spread, or does that Toronto defense keep them close?
The Toronto defense can keep it close, and let's not forget, it was, 6 weeks ago that the Argonauts went in there and beat the Rough Riders with everybody healthy. Chad Kelly shows once again, even in the rain, he can slice and dice with anybody. And that touch pass that he threw to Kevin Mattel over the middle, what a beautiful football that he threw. Chad Kelly, to me, right now, is the best quarterback in this league. Throw out the interceptions. Let's get rid of them because he takes his chances. Kelly knows how to read a defense. He knows how to attack a defense. His only thing, and he is in this category with Vernon Adams Jr., he has a tendency to throw that deep ball just a little too much. When Kelly is in a groove, watch out. The Rough Riders, they're still missing Tavon Campbell. They're still missing Roland Milligan, who's probably out for the season. This team is hurting right now. They're on a 2-game losing streak, and I don't know if they have a lot of answers on offense either. Even though Trevor Harris is Hall of Fame material, right now he seems to be, as you pointed out, in a little bit of a dip in this season.
This is a tough matchup for the Riders, even though they've got the home field advantage, for all the reasons that you've said. I also like what I've seen from that Toronto Argonauts defense over the last few weeks. I think they've really stepped up and tightened up against some pretty tough offenses as well. I think the home field advantage, the Riders eke out a win, but I don't think they cover that 4.5 points. This one is a field goal one way or the other, but I'm taking the Riders to win it.
The last time I talked about these two meeting, I said Toronto would put up 40. I don't think Toronto's going to put up 40 this weekend. I do believe that Toronto has the horses on offense to score enough to win. Saskatchewan will not cover.
Closing out the weekend on Sunday, the red-hot BC Lions head to Ottawa to take on the winless Ottawa RedBlacks. The Lions are a 6.5 point favorite on the road. We've seen some big spreads involving Ottawa already this season. This is another one, a big spread for a road team being a favorite. I don't know if I see anything that indicates that the RedBlacks are going to keep this one close. Before you even get a chance to speak, I'm taking the BC Lions to cover this one.
BC is just looking so good. And BC has done well in Ottawa over the past few years. What is Ottawa going to do? Ryan Dinwiddie is non-committal as to what he's going to do at quarterback, whether it's going to be McLeod Bethel Thompson or if he's going to stick with Jake Mayer. In either case, do you think that that's enough to win? I think McLeod Bethel Thompson probably pushes BC secondary a lot more because he's more willing to throw the deep ball. McLeod in mop-up rules hasn't looked spectacular. Maybe with a start under his belt, he'll look a lot better. Ottawa has to get their run game going. BC's got a two-headed monster with James Butler and Xander Horvath. What what do you do when they're both out there if you're a defense? Which one do you key on? And where does your middle linebacker go?
I feel we're at the point where Ottawa could put both Mayer and McLeod Bethel-Thompson on the field with 11 additional players on offense, and I still don't think they've got enough to beat the BC Lions at this point.
Keelan White has been a real great player for them this season in his second year with the team. He was a draft pick with the RedBlacks in 2025. For the BC Lions, who see an opportunity to jump ahead of the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, and really, if they continue to win and the Bombers falter anywhere and they get a 2-game gap, that game Winnipeg-BC in late September won't mean anywhere near as much. I like the Lions. Nathan Rourke has really found his groove again. He is Captain Canada. He is spectacular to watch. Can we have a BC Montreal Grey Cup and just get it over with?
At this point, looking at the teams in the standings, that's the matchup I want to see. We were on the right track last year, didn't quite come to fruition. Davis Alexander also wasn't healthy by the end of last season either. I would love to see a BC Montreal matchup with both starting quarterbacks at 100% going into the game.
It would be absolutely spectacular. I'm going to be there. I'm really looking forward to it. Yeah, I'm going to take BC in the cover. It's weird that 2 games have 6.5-point spreads in favor of the road team on a weekend. Home team swept last week. Can the road teams make a statement again? Home teams are 25-21 overall. BC in the cover.
Pretty interesting that, 6.5-point spreads, and we're both taking both road teams as well.
Third Down Gamble uses the expert resources of the Canadian Football League and 3 Down Nation. For up-to-date, insightful statistics and analysis, please visit cfl.ca and 3downnation.com. The CFL on CBC theme music is used with written permission from the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation.
Thank you for listening to our show. Third Down Gamble is hosted on Podbean. Follow us on Twitter, where our handle is @ThirdDownGamble. Join us again next time. The Third Down Gamble Podcast. Audio worth watching.